The reason why I am so passionate about dyslexia is because of being a dyslexic person myself.
The morning had begun with the kind of stillness that only the ancient royal residences seemed capable of holding. St. James's Palace rested beneath a pale London sky, its red brick glowing faintly as the sun rose. Inside those walls, Princess Beatrice stirred awake, unaware that before the hour was over, her world would tilt beneath her feet. She moved with her usual unhurried composure, a softness in her pace that spoke of a lifetime spent balancing public duty with private longing. For her, mornings were a refuge. They were the few moments when she belonged solely to herself, before the weight of the day's obligations pressed in. Her lady's maid arranged her desk with the day's correspondence. It was a routine with the same rhythm each morning. Letters from charities, invitations from institutions, briefings from advisors. Nothing ever arrived without purpose. Yet on this particular day, among the envelopes and neat stacks of documents, there lay one object that broke the delicate order. A small padded envelope marked private, sealed carefully, almost too carefully, and addressed to her alone. The handwriting was familiar. It belonged to someone she trusted deeply, someone who would never send something so cryptic unless there was urgency behind the gesture. Curiosity flickered across her features, though she concealed most of it with the practiced grace expected of a princess. She dismissed her maid with a quiet thank you and approached the envelope with gentle caution. Her fingers slipped beneath the seal and revealed a single letter handwritten with urgency and a small USB drive taped to the page. The letter held only 6 words. "B, you need to see these." No explanation, no greeting, only a warning wrapped in concern. A faint tension settled over the room like a veil. She closed the door, locked it, then walked slowly toward her writing table. With a hesitance that had nothing to do with fear, yet everything to do with instinct, she placed the USB drive into her laptop. The device hummed to life, and a single folder opened before her. Inside were a handful of photographs, only a few, just enough to shatter the delicate balance of truth she had held close. What appeared on the screen made her breath catch. She leaned forward, as if distance would blur the image into something more forgivable. But it did not. The photographs were painfully clear. Her husband, Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi, walked through a sunlit terrace beside a woman she did not know. His hand grazed her shoulder with unmistakable familiarity. In another shot, they sat closely in the shade of a Mediterranean villa, the kind secluded enough to promise privacy. Too secluded, too intimate. For one frozen moment, Beatrice forgot how to breathe. Her world was a palace built upon composure, yet the foundations trembled as she stared at the images. The woman's identity meant little. The implication meant everything. The setting was unmistakable. She herself had visited that estate with Edoardo the year before. She remembered the courtyard's pale stone, the climbing vines, the small staircase leading down to a private garden. Memories once sweet began to taste of betrayal. A soft sound escaped her lips, barely louder than a breath. Her eyes glistened, though she fought to keep her expression steady. She reached toward the screen, almost as if touching the image might force it to yield a more innocent explanation. But the photographs did not disappear. They sat before her, cold and still, carrying the weight of a truth she had prayed never to face. She closed the laptop abruptly and pressed her palms against her eyes. Tears slipped through her fingers despite her effort to contain them. She had always been the quiet one, the steady one, the daughter who kept her dignity even when the world spun into chaos around her. This, however, pierced through every veil of royal restraint. She whispered his name. "Edo, tell me this is not what it appears to be." Her voice trembled, not from anger but from an ache that settled deep in her chest. It was not only betrayal she feared, it was a loss. It was the crumbling of a hope she had cherished, the possibility that the man she loved might not have been honest with her. Not truly, not fully. The clock on the mantel chimed softly. She did not look up. Her tears gathered silently, falling onto the letter that had delivered the blow. She wondered for a moment if the sender had hesitated before placing the envelope in the post. She wondered if they too had felt the sting of this truth, or if they had simply felt a responsibility to protect her from the oncoming storm. Outside, the palace remained perfectly calm. Guards changed shifts with disciplined precision. Footmen walked briskly along the corridors. No one knew yet that a princess was breaking quietly in her own chambers. This was the strange cruelty of royal life. The world could be collapsing within you, and still the palace would continue its routine as though nothing at all had shifted. She stood, needing air, needing space. She crossed the room, her footsteps light on the polished floor. She went to the window and pulled the curtains open. The sky had brightened, though she felt none of its warmth. London stretched out before her, serene and indifferent. The city knew nothing of her heartbreak. Neither did the press, waiting in distant streets for a story they had no reason yet to suspect. Beatrice pressed her hand against the cold glass. Her reflection stared back at her, dignified yet wounded, a princess dressed in mourning silk, on the verge of unraveling. She felt suddenly young again, as if the years of learning to hold herself together under scrutiny had fallen away and left her exposed. "I cannot believe this," she whispered. "Not him, not us." For a moment she felt herself slipping toward despair, but something steadier rose beneath it, a quiet resolve that had always lived within her. She turned from the window, wiped her tears, and stood tall. She did not yet know what the photographs meant. She did not know the truth behind them. She did not know how deeply this wound would cut, but she knew one thing very clearly. She would face this not as a subject of gossip, but as a woman seeking truth. The palace clock struck 8. The day had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The weight of appearances, the whispers began long before anyone dared knock on her door. In a palace, news moves like breath, invisible yet everywhere at once. By late morning, St. James's Palace felt subtly altered. Conversations lowered as Beatrice passed. Footsteps softened. Even the queries seemed to walk with a new caution. Something had shifted, though no one yet knew the full extent. In her private rooms, Princess Beatrice sat before a cup of untouched tea, her hands clasped to still their trembling. The photographs had been burned into her memory. Each glance at the screen had added another layer of disbelief, another thread of fear. She had not cried again since that first wave, though her eyes were rimmed with emotion. She had chosen silence, the only weapon she felt in control of. Her sister, Princess Eugenie, arrived shortly after 11. She entered without ceremony, breathless with worry, her coat still buttoned. She rushed forward, her hands already reaching for Beatrice's. "Bea, what has happened? They told me you shut yourself in here. Talk to me." Beatrice did not speak at first. She simply handed her the laptop, the USB drive still inside. Eugenie clicked through the folder slowly. When she reached the final photograph, her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Beatrice, no." Her sister knelt beside her, resting her head against Beatrice's shoulder, like they had done as children when storms rattled the old windows of Royal Lodge. For a moment, the two were no longer princesses, but sisters bound by a shared ache. "Tell me they are not real," Eugenie whispered. "I cannot," Beatrice murmured. "I know that villa. I know that terrace. He promised he would never go back without me." Outside the door, palace staff exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen crises before, but this one was different. It involved the daughter who had always avoided scandal, the daughter who valued dignity above display. The private princess, now thrust toward the edge of a very public heartbreak. Downstairs, the communications office had begun its own quiet emergency. Aides parsed fragmented reports from international journalists. A foreign tabloid was reportedly preparing a story involving intimate photographs of a senior royal's spouse. Names were not yet confirmed, but the palace strategists felt a cold certainty blooming. They read between lines better than most. A hush fell over the staff corridors. Phones buzzed with muted urgency. Advisors whispered behind half-closed doors. There was no official statement, yet the machinery of damage control churned. Beatrice, however, heard none of it. She was living in a stillness of her own making. By mid-afternoon, her father arrived. Prince Andrew entered through a seldom-used entrance to avoid detection, his face shadowed with concern. He moved with a deliberate calm, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. This was not the kind of crisis he could solve with protocol. This was his daughter's heart. He closed the door behind him and approached her slowly. "My darling girl," he said, voice gentler than she had heard from him in months. "I came as soon as I heard. Show me." She handed him the photographs without a word. He studied them with the expression of a man who had seen scandal from every angle, yet still flinched at the cruelty of it. "We must be cautious," he said finally, choosing each word carefully. "Pictures can deceive. Angles can lie. You must not let the world dictate what you believe." Her eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. "I am not thinking of the world. I am thinking of my marriage." The admission cracked something in him. He sat beside her, placing a hand over hers with rare tenderness. "You have always been strong," he whispered. "Stronger than even you realize. Whatever happens next, you will not face it alone." As evening settled over London, the palace lights glowed softly against the winter dusk. Inside, the air felt charged with a quiet storm. The staff sensed that a line had been crossed, though no one dared articulate it. Beatrice rose from her seat and walked to the window again. Outside, the capital carried on with its evening rhythms, indifferent to royal distress. She watched the red buses pass, the gentle sway of commuters, the golden beams of street lamps beginning their nightly vigil. All of it felt so normal, so painfully unaware of the turmoil enclosed behind her curtains. "I do not fear for my title or reputation," she said softly, turning back to her family. "I fear that the life I believed in is slipping away." Her father and sister exchanged a glance, a silent agreement forming between them. They would do everything in their power to protect her, yet they knew that the true battle lay not with the press or the public, but within Beatrice's own heart. She returned to the sofa, sat tall, and folded her hands in her lap. The tears had dried, the ache remained, but beneath it, a faint flicker of resolve appeared. "We must wait," she said, as if arriving at a decision. "Wait for clarity, wait for the truth, wait for him to explain." It was the first step of a long journey, one that would test her patience, her loyalty, and her strength. But she took it with the quiet dignity she had been raised to embody. Outside, the palace lamps shone against the darkening sky, unaware that behind those walls a princess braced herself for a truth that could either mend or shatter her world. The leak. For 3 uneasily quiet days, the palace held its breath. St. James's moved with a deliberate calm, though beneath the polished surface the staff sensed something shifting, something perilous. Princess Beatrice had withdrawn from most engagements, citing private family matters. Those who served closest to her tiptoed through corridors, speaking in careful tones, as though any sudden sound might break the fragile stillness she carried. But the stillness was doomed. In royal life, even silence has an expiration. And on the 4th morning, the blow arrived. Across Europe, on the glossy front page of a foreign tabloid known for its ruthlessness, the photographs emerged. Not rumors, not whispers, not speculation. The very images that had torn through Beatrice's heart now blazed across international newsstands. They were captioned with cruel certainty, transforming ambiguity into accusation. The story was packaged with breathless drama, implying a clandestine romance, a betrayal unfolding behind palace walls. Beatrice awoke to pounding on her door. Her private secretary entered, a printed copy trembling in his hand. He looked as though he wished he could disappear. "You should see this before anyone else speaks to you about it." She accepted the paper with a composure that felt forced, as if she had stepped outside of herself. Slowly, almost ritualistically, she unfolded it. The images stared back at her. Her husband, the terrace, the other woman, all of it now stripped of nuance, plastered before the world with sensational commentary. For a long moment, she did not blink. Her face was still, almost serene, but her eyes glistened with a pain too deep for tears. "So it is public now," she whispered at last. Her secretary nodded. "The story is spreading quickly. The press outside has doubled." In an instant, palace calm dissolved. The communications office mobilized like an army preparing for siege. Advisors gathered in a conference room, speaking over one another in low, urgent tones. Lawyers reviewed options. Press officers drafted possible responses. But no one could decide whether silence or denial would serve her better. Either choice carried danger. The monarchy's history was full of bruises. Scandals had toppled reputations and stained legacies. Every breath a royal took, public or private, could be twisted into spectacle. Yet this felt different. This was not a distant relative, nor an attending courtier. This was Beatrice's husband, a man the monarchy had welcomed into its fold, a man she had defended, supported, trusted, and now the world believed he had betrayed her. By noon, television screens across Britain flashed with breaking headlines. Commentators spoke with a kind of gleeful caution, dissecting the photographs frame by frame. Some expressed sympathy, others speculated on the state of the marriage with unrestrained confidence. Reporters stationed themselves outside palace gates, hoping for a glimpse of the princess, hoping to capture heartbreak through a car window or downcast gaze. Inside her sitting room, Beatrice watched none of it. She sat on the edge of her sofa, hands clasped tightly together, waiting for the one person who owed her an explanation. Eduardo. He had been abroad when the photographs leaked. He had called only once since she confronted him with the images, offering partial explanations, half answers, strained reassurances. But now, The world had seen what she had seen. Silence was no longer possible. The front door opened a little after 2. She heard footsteps, hesitant and uneven. When the doorknob turned and he appeared, his expression was a portrait of anxiety. "B," he said softly. She lifted her chin, summoning strength she did not yet feel. "We need to speak." He closed the door, removing his coat with slow, careful movements, as though afraid one sudden gesture might shatter the fragile peace between them. He walked toward her, but she motioned for him to stop at a distance. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Everything. Not fragments, not softened stories, the truth." He swallowed, glancing briefly at the floor before meeting her gaze. "What you saw was real, but it was not what they claimed. She is someone I worked with on a private project. We were discussing business and we were careless. I see that now." "Careless," she repeated, the word lingering like a bruise. "Is that what you call holding another woman's hand? Sitting close enough for the world to interpret it as affection? You promised me honesty. You promised me loyalty." Her voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. She rose and walked toward the fireplace, pressing her palm to the mantel as though grounding herself. The flames crackled softly, a counterpoint to the silence that stretched between them. He followed at a distance. "I should have told you," he admitted. "I should have been transparent about the meeting. I never imagined someone would be photographing us. I never meant to hurt you." The sincerity in his tone was genuine, yet the uncertainty in her eyes remained. "Do you love her?" she asked, the question barely above a whisper. "No," he said immediately. "There is nothing like that between us." "Then why?" she murmured. "Do those photographs look like intimacy?" He pressed his hand to his forehead. "Because I was foolish. Because I forgot that my life is no longer private. Because I underestimated how it would appear." She turned toward him fully now. The vulnerability in her gaze softened him, but the pain within it pierced deeply. "Do you understand what this has done?" she said. "Not only to me, but to us. The world is circling. My family is in turmoil, and I do not know what to believe. I will fix this," he promised, stepping closer. "I will speak publicly if I must. I will explain everything." She stepped back faintly. "I do not want a public spectacle. I want the truth, Eduardo, and trust once shaken is not restored by press statements." He stopped moving, absorbing her words. The palace outside felt like an entirely different world. Footmen hurried through corridors, staff whispered updates, advisors attempted to contain the spreading fire. Yet inside this room, the crisis was purely human. A woman, a man, a fracture between them. As the afternoon faded into early evening, Beatrice felt exhaustion seep through her. She sank into the nearest chair, placing her face in her hands. Eduardo approached slowly, kneeling beside her. "I love you," he said quietly. "I will spend as long as it takes to make this right." She lifted her face. Her eyes were red, but her composure returned in measured breaths. "This is not something I can decide tonight," she said. "I need time. Real time. Not royal time. Not public time. Time for myself." He nodded, though sorrow shaded his expression. "I will give you that," he whispered. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, camera flashes lit the dusk, hungry for a glimpse of her. They knew nothing of the pain unfolding within, nothing of the quiet devastation, nothing of the fragile hope that perhaps, in time, truth might emerge from ruin. But as she watched the lights flicker, she knew one thing with certainty. Her story had entered a new chapter. One she had not chosen, one she would face with dignity, even as her heart trembled. The family divide. The story did not fade when the sun went down. It rarely does when it involves royalty. Through the night, commentators replayed the same set of photographs, each voice adding another layer to the mounting speculation. By morning, the narrative had hardened. In the eyes of the public, Princess Beatrice had become the latest royal woman facing humiliation in plain view of the world. Inside the royal households, telephones rang with relentless insistence. Aides fielded calls from journalists, from international networks, from editors promising that the story would grow harsher if the palace did not respond. Every person wanted a quote, a reaction, a sign of fracture. What they received instead was an unbroken wall of 5 carefully chosen words, that there would be no comment. This official stillness, however, concealed an internal storm. At Buckingham Palace, the senior household staff met behind closed doors in a high-ceilinged room lined with portraits of earlier monarchs. The air was heavy with the familiar blend of polished wood, old paper, and quiet tension. Some argued that silence was a mistake, that the world needed to hear that Beatrice had the full support of the monarchy. Others insisted that any statement would fuel the fire, that the story would move on if they did not engage. One advisor, his voice low and measured, summed up the fear that lingered in the room. If the palace spoke, every word would be dissected as evidence of domestic war. If they stayed silent, the silence itself would be interpreted as tacit acknowledgement of betrayal. There was no path without cost. In the midst of this strategic debate, the human heart of the matter beat quietly at Windsor, where Beatrice had chosen to stay for a few days away from the capital. The stone walls, the ancient oaks, the slower rhythm of the grounds offered her a fragile shelter. Yet even here, she could not outrun the knowledge that the images of her husband and another woman were now printed in countless copies, passed between strangers and newsagents, shared in whispers she would never hear. Her mother arrived that afternoon with the force of a storm. Sarah Ferguson, familiar with both the warmth and the frost of the press, moved through the residence like a woman walking onto a battlefield. Her embrace was fierce, her eyes bright with furious protectiveness. "You do not deserve this," she said, holding Beatrice's face in her hands. "You never have. You never will." Beatrice drew a careful breath, steadying herself. "Deserve has very little to do with life, Mama, or marriage, or the press." Sarah paced in front of the fireplace, her energy restless, her hands gesturing as if she were arguing with an invisible jury. "They will tear him apart in the papers. They will rip at your marriage until there is nothing left. You cannot just stay silent and let them write your story for you." Beatrice watched her mother quietly. She understood that this anger came from love, but she had inherited the older royal instinct, the one that leaned toward composure over confrontation. "I do not want to fight with the newspapers," she replied softly. "I am already fighting with my own thoughts. That is quite enough for me." Her mother stopped and faced her. "Then let the family speak for you. Let them show that you are not alone in this." But the family was not united on how to proceed. At another residence, voices of caution urged restraint. The Queen herself, seasoned by decades of storms greater than this, offered the same advice she had given through countless crises. Time would bring perspective. Hasty reactions rarely aged well. The institution must not appear divided. Yet even she could not remove the ache from her great-granddaughter's voice when Beatrice's name was mentioned. In the smaller circle of Beatrice's private life, there was one voice she did choose to hear. Late one evening, her phone buzzed with a call from across the ocean. The name on the screen brought a faint, unexpected comfort. "Harry." She answered with a quiet greeting. On the other end, his tone was softer than the world had grown used to hearing, free of performance, stripped of duty. "I saw it," he said simply. "I am so sorry." The two cousins spoke for a long while, not as figures bound to an ancient institution, but as individuals who knew the strange ache of seeing their private pain turned into public entertainment. He did not offer advice heavy with platitudes. Instead, he offered understanding. "People will tell you what you should feel," he said gently. "They will tell you to be dignified or angry or forgiving. But the only person who has to live with your decision is you. Not the palace, not the press. You." His words resonated in the quiet of her room long after the call ended. In a life where so much was predetermined, the idea that her response could be her own felt both terrifying and liberating. Meanwhile, the palace machinery continued to move. A decision was made, not in a single dramatic moment, but through a series of hesitant agreements. Beatrice and Eduardo would appear together at a prearranged charity event. They would walk side by side. They would offer no direct comment, yet their presence would imply that the marriage still stood. It would be, in effect, a performance of unity. When the day arrived, the air outside the venue was thick with anticipation. Cameras dotted the pavement like a forest of watchful eyes. Commentators stood ready to describe every visible detail: the cut of Beatrice's coat, the distance between the couple's hands, the shape of her smile. Inside the car, on the way to the event, silence stretched between husband and wife. She stared out the window, watching London blur past. Familiar streets turned unreal by the pressure of what lay ahead. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Eduardo asked quietly. She considered her answer. "I am sure that I do not want my absence to become another headline, and I am sure that I must show I have not been broken, even if I feel altered." He reached for her hand, hesitated, then gently rested his palm over hers. She did not pull away, but neither did she lean into the touch. It hung between them, a symbol of something suspended between fracture and repair. When they stepped out of the car, the flashes were blinding. Reporters called her name. Questions flew through the cold air, sharp and insistent. Is the marriage in trouble? How is the princess coping? Has she forgiven him? Beatrice kept her gaze steady, her smile small but graceful. She moved with the same careful poise she had practiced her whole life, yet every step felt heavier. She could feel the weight of thousands of eyes trying to decipher her heart from the angle of her chin. Inside the event, she spoke with guests, listened to presentations, and posed for official photographs. On the surface, everything looked composed. Yet those who knew her best saw the new distance in her eyes, the rare moments when her expression slipped, and a flicker of vulnerability shone through. That evening, as images of their joint appearance appeared online, commentators rushed to interpret them. Some declared the marriage saved. Others saw only a staged performance. The world argued over her life without ever truly knowing it. Back in the quiet of her room, away from cameras and questions, Beatrice removed the carefully chosen coat, the delicate shoes, the public smile. She stood before the mirror and studied the woman reflected there. Not the princess in a polished frame, but the person beneath. Her family could advise. The palace could strategize. The press could speculate. But somewhere beneath those layers, a decision was forming that belonged entirely to her. The question was no longer what the world thought had happened, but what she would do with the heartbreak that had been laid bare. The divide now was not only among courtiers or commentators, it ran through her own heart, separating the part of her that longed to protect the marriage from the part that feared trusting it again. And as the palace settled into another long night, Princess Beatrice realized that the next step would not be taken in front of cameras, but in the quiet places where only she could hear her own voice. The choice. Spring arrived quietly, slipping into the royal gardens with gentle colors and a softness that contrasted sharply with the months preceding it. The storm outside had eased, or at least grown tired of itself. New scandals had replaced the old. New headlines had overtaken the ones that carried her name. For the tabloids, Beatrice's heartbreak had become yesterday's drama. But inside her, the echoes remained. She returned to Windsor for a time, seeking distance from the city's unblinking eyes. The stone corridors, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, offered the kind of silence that felt almost protective. She walked the grounds in long, contemplative paths, her steps measured, her thoughts circling the same questions like birds refusing to settle. Could a marriage survive such a fracture? Could trust return once it had been pierced so publicly? Could she forgive me? And perhaps most quietly of all, should she? Each morning, she rose early and visited the small chapel tucked near the gardens. It was a place she had always found comforting, but now it took on a deeper meaning. She would sit in the first pew, hands folded, the sunlight spilling in through the stained glass in soft hues of blue and gold. Sometimes she prayed aloud. Sometimes she simply breathed. Sometimes she cried in silence, not from fresh pain, but from the weight of decisions that could not be postponed forever. One afternoon, she found herself walking the same path where she and Eduardo had strolled after their engagement. The memory was so vivid she could almost feel the cool breeze of that day, hear the quiet laughter they had shared, remember the illusion that nothing could ever threaten the life they were building. Now she paused beneath the same oak tree, tracing her fingers across the rough bark, grounding herself. She heard footsteps behind her. Eduardo approached slowly, his expression cautious, yet hopeful. They had seen each other many times in recent weeks, but today felt different. He sensed a shift in her posture, a quiet readiness. "Bea," he said gently, "thank you for agreeing to meet." She nodded. "We cannot go on without speaking honestly, Edo." He exhaled with quiet relief. "Then let us be honest." They walked together, side by side, though not touching. The garden was quiet except for the distant sound of birdsong and the faint rustle of leaves. "I cannot pretend I did not hurt you," he began, "and I will never deny the pain I caused. But I need you to know that nothing happened beyond what was seen. There was no affair. There was no betrayal of the heart, only an awful lapse in judgment." She listened without interrupting. She had heard his explanations before, but today she was listening not for facts, but for the truth that lived beneath them. "I felt abandoned," she said after a long silence. "Not only by what happened, but by the knowledge that you chose secrecy over transparency. That is what wounded me most." He lowered his gaze. "I know, and I hate myself for it." They paused on the small stone bridge overlooking the stream. The water moved slowly, carrying petals that had fallen from the early blossoms. "Edo," she said quietly. Love cannot survive on apologies alone. It survives on changed behavior, on renewed commitment. In truth, he stepped closer, though still respectful of her space. Then let me show you all of that. Not in public, not for the cameras, for you. Her eyes softened, though her expression remained thoughtful. I believe that you are sorry. I believe that you wish to repair this. But forgiveness requires choosing to hope again, and hope takes courage. His voice broke slightly. Then let me earn your courage. The breeze stirred her hair as she looked at him. For months she had carried the weight of betrayal, confusion, and fear. But here in the quiet of the garden she felt something else rising within her. Not certainty, not resolution, but a fragile willingness to begin again. She extended her hand, and he took it with reverence. This does not erase the past, she said, and it does not guarantee the future, but it is a beginning. His eyes filled, not with triumph, but with gratitude. It is more than I had hoped for. They walked back toward the palace slowly, not as the couple the public imagined, but as two people choosing to rebuild something delicate and real. In the weeks that followed, Beatrice made a quiet promise to herself. She would live her life not according to headlines or speculation, but according to her own heart. She would allow time to do its work. She would allow trust to either return or reveal its limits. She would not rush. She would not harden. She would choose dignity every step of the way. Because in the end, the true strength of a princess is not found in her crown, but in her courage to rise again, even with a wounded heart. In the end, Princess Beatrice's quiet courage became the true heart of this story. What she faced was painful, but how she rose was powerful. If you want more royal documentaries told with depth and dignity, subscribe, share, and stay with us for the next chapter behind the palace walls.